So this is going to be task 4, the last part of our sketching for the IKEA toy that we've been doing. The main idea behind this whole task, or last 3 tasks, has been for you to get better at sketching. All the videos that I've been making, going over some of the finer details of getting better at sketching or drawing orthographics by hand. All of that has just been for you to get better. It's not been a test of what your drawing ability is like. We're going to be looking at where you'd be getting marks in the assessment. This has pretty much just been taken from the marking scheme on the SK website that you can access, but I've adapted it a wee bit to fit our task. For example, task 1 is 6 marks here, but it wouldn't really be that much. It's split up across a few different things, but you would be getting all these marks. It would just be spread up across a couple of questions. For submitting the work, I'd want you to just write down the marks and maybe a wee reasoning why you're getting them marks. If it's obvious on this one, for example, maybe just go around and give yourself 1 mark, just so it's visible for me, where I can see your line of thinking and why you're giving yourself marks, or maybe why you're not giving yourself marks. If you get to a point where you've not got a mark for something and you can add it in, just go ahead, add it in, give yourself the mark. There's nothing wrong with that. Some of the drawings that you've been doing, you might feel like you have to do the full drawing again, and that's the point in this, trying to get better at drawing, seeing your mistakes. So if you're getting 1 or 2 marks in all 3 of the tasks, you're going to be wanting to do that again and try and improve on that. If you need any more support on maybe how to do some things, or if you maybe don't have access to some resources like pens and pencils, then just let me know and we can talk about it from there. So quickly go over task 1. I've got my example that's good and an example that is not so good. I'll try and get through it as quickly as I can. Some of it's really obvious, some of it might not be. So task 1 is elevation correctly sketched to a good proportion. So elevation correctly sketched, so looking at it, the object straight on. Good proportions, I've went over that a few times now. It's just looking at some of the sizes across your full thing, making sure it all makes sense. So if the total diameter of this is 80, or to put that onto here, just making sure that it would all look about right. So if I had 2 80s, that would make 160, so that size sort of makes sense there. End elevation correctly sketched in good proportion, same thing, end elevation, good proportion. Plan correctly sketched and projected from the elevation, so same width. You can clearly see my construction lines, very faint as they're meant to be. Depth of plan and end elevation in good proportion with each other, so the depth of the plan is meaning this, and the depth of the end elevation is meaning that size there. So the actual, how deep it goes back, it has to be the same, because these are the same sizes. If you think about your bounce line that you'd normally use, this would go over to here, and just making sure that makes sense. Application of construction and projection across all sketches. So I've got my construction lines throughout the full thing. You might not be able to see it from the camera, but just making sure that I've got my construction lines and my outlines are visible. Correct dimensioning, went over this in the first video as well, just making sure that your dimensioning lines isn't touching the object. When you turn the page to the side, all your sizes that are on the vertical axis are all on top of the line in the same way. So if I had it this way, they're all on top of the line, all turned. If I had it this way, it should all be on top of the line and all turned. And looking at things like diameter symbol, center lines, center points, all the usual stuff gets you a mark for that as well. It's an example of maybe where you're not getting marks is looking at something like this. So this is an obvious show of where you wouldn't get a mark for the plan. So it's not been projected up, I've not got construction lines, it's a totally different size, it's not in good proportions. It's just generally obvious that I've not spent a lot of time on it or watched the video that I put out for task 1 that went over all these things. Dimensioning very poor, very limited, not enough for 3D modelling, just missing loads of wee things, not getting any marks here. I would have to then go back, watch that first video again, attempt the task again, look at my exemplar, and just try and get better with this. It's something you're going to be expected to do at National 5, so you really need to work at this. So that's task 1. So on this one, I wouldn't bother assessing this. I'd just try and start again and see if you can do it any better. If you're maybe getting 4 or 5 marks, then just write where you're not getting the marks, as long as you can show me that you know where you need to improve, and that's totally fine. You can just try and fix things up quickly and then give yourself a mark, that's totally fine. So looking at task 2, where we're drawing a pictorial sketch, this is giving you 2 marks if it's a good quality sketch and 1 mark if it's a fair quality sketch. Now, it doesn't give you a clear definition for fair and good. It's really just up to your own judgment here, what you're giving yourself the marks for. This is your work, so try not to be biased. It's just going to... you're not going to improve if you're biased and just say it's good when you clearly think it is poor. I'll give you some examples of maybe where something would be fair and something would be good. So here I've got 2 cubes that I've drawn in an isometric. So I've got, when you're doing an isometric, you've got to make sure all your lines are consistent with each other and that they're 30 degrees. Now, if I got a protractor and checked this, maybe it would be 32, 35 maybe 25. That doesn't matter as long as the lines are clearly consistent. If we look at this one, for example, this angle here and this angle here are clearly different. So this would maybe be pushing on a fair quality, maybe even no marks awarded. This one would be giving good. Other thing that we're looking at for when you're doing isometrics circles is that your circles might be a bit weird looking. So if we look at this one, all these circles are consistent with each other. Even if the first one was a wee bit off, the next one needs to be consistent with it, just so it all flows and looks like it's an isometric. But looking at this one, the line's clearly up the top. This circle is very different to this circle, and it doesn't look quite right. And just generally looking at how much effort you've put into the drawing. If it's obvious you've only spent 5 minutes on it, like what I did here, then you're going to have to try and do it a wee bit better than that and just work through it and try and get as best you can. If you're giving yourself a fair quality mark, you don't have to submit the full task again, just go through it, try and get a wee bit better. I'm not expecting you to become a wizard overnight at sketching, just try and do your absolute best. So for the last one, you're getting 3 marks for high quality rendering, 2 marks for good quality rendering, and 1 mark for fair quality rendering. Same thing, we don't have a clear definition from the SQA about what high, good and fair quality sketching is, but I'll give you a few things you can use to try and give yourself the best understanding of what these all could mean. So what I would say 1 mark would get you is if you've got something a bit like this. So I've got a black pencil line going around the full thing. So if you've got a black pencil line going through your full thing, straight away I'm thinking only 1 mark. You've got to make sure that you are going round or drawing the object with the colour that you're using. If not, it creates something that doesn't look realistic and looks just off. You can't see the material, can't see shading correctly. It's just something you shouldn't do. So we've got another thing that I can see here is that the pencils, you can clearly just see the pencil line going through it. Now you might hear that you've only got to go one way with your pencil, which sometimes is true, but I find that just going over it at slightly different angles, nice and softly, can get you a better saturated product. Might be a wee bit darker because you're going over it a few times, but I think that's just the best way to do it. And clearly just not enough effort being put in. If we look at this one, for example, this has been just fully saturated with colour. You can't see wee white spaces like you can in this one. It's clearly a bit more effort's been put into it. You can clearly see it going from dark to light. The only thing is that there's sort of 3 clear sections here of the darkness. So this is dark, this is slightly darker, and this is the lightest. It's not been blended properly. If we look at this one, so we've got the colour is fully saturated again, and it's a nice slow gradient. Clearly a lot more effort has been put into this than this and this. One thing you can do if maybe you're struggling with good quality, good, high and fair quality marks, I would maybe just speak to someone in your house. What do you think of this out of good, fair and high quality? What do you think it is? And see what they say. Might be obvious that you've rushed it yourself, but you might be a wee bit biased and can't see some things because you've maybe spent a wee bit of time on it. So, as I said at the start, for submitting this, I want you to just be as fair as possible. Try and put in a wee bit extra work if you're maybe missing a few marks. If you think you've got no marks at all, then I'm asking you to do the task again, just to your absolute best standard. Try and put a wee bit more effort into it and submit that instead, and it'll give you a few tips if you're struggling. But just write where you're getting the marks. So 3 marks. High quality sketching, you can see that I've spent a lot of time in it. You can clearly see that it's meant to be a plastic material and a wood material or whatever you've decided to do. It clearly goes from dark to light. I've got highlights. It's a clear, nice transition from light to dark, apart from maybe wee bits of highlight that are a bit more drastic. So you're just writing that down and saying how many marks you've got. And then taking a picture of that and uploading it again. So if you've got any more questions on that or the marking scheme, just make sure you ask me. And that's it for task 4.